What's the most stressful part of going through a big change like a merger or an acquisition? It's not just the spreadsheets, the systems, or even the legal work, it's the people. Teams get anxious, processes clash, culture gets lost in translation, and things like innovation and growth, they just take a back seat while everyone's trying to figure out how to work together. Now, today's guest knows this challenge inside out. Alex Black is the Director of Client Services and Innovation at Ad Valorem, which is a leading accountancy firm that recently became part of the ETL Group. He's been at the heart of integrating teams, standardising processes, and introducing powerful innovations, including AI, all during periods of intense change and growth. In this episode, Alex is going to share the lessons that he's learned along the way, from managing resistance and unifying the teams to building systems that actually support innovation rather than fight it. So if you want to avoid the common traps and reduce stress during a merger, acquisition, or any major change, this episode is for you. Welcome to De-Stress Your Business, the podcast where we show you how to get incredible results in your business without constant stress. I'm Alexis Kingsbury, a serial entrepreneur and founder at AirManual, and I'm joined by Alex Black. Welcome, Alex.
Hi there, thanks for having me.
I'm really looking forward to this. You've been in the thick of supporting businesses through change, including clients, but also your own journey at Ad Valorem, including, but not limited to, its acquisition by ETL Group and acquiring other accountancy firms and so on. Perhaps we could start with, what have been the most surprising parts of those experiences for you?
Great question. I think each one comes with its own surprises, and that's probably one of the first things to understand is each of those changes, each of those teams, each individual is different and will have different ways or different motives or different reasons for what they do, and kind of nothing is random in that regard. And it's kind of trying to uncover what the issues might be, what the challenges might be, and they're often not what you expect. And I think you go in, almost psych yourself up for one thing, and that actually is really easy, and then you find another thing that you thought would be really really easy, and that's the hardest part to get around. So I think it's kind of remaining ready for anything, but kind of not being too fixated on one thing, and kind of seeking to understand, for me, is always the best place to start. Kind of go in open mind, understand the layout of what you've got before you start trying to change it, and then kind of map from where you are to where you want to be, and start one step at a time.
Nice. Yeah, that's interesting. And when we're looking about the kind of stress side of this, the things that cause the most anxiety and frustration and tension and friction, like what have you seen are perhaps some of the biggest causes of stress, particularly if we start for the team, where during that big change process, whether it's part of the acquisition or whatever?
I think uncertainty. So someone once told me 99% of the things we fear never actually happen. They're not real. They're the what ifs, and we have a spiraling what if scenario of this way, that way, that way. And actually, if you can just be far clearer with what is going to happen, what you do know the answer to, what you don't know, but you're going to kind of find that out with them. And the fact that it's okay that we don't know everything, reassure them and provide that kind of psychological safety in terms of it's okay to not know all the answers. We don't expect you to. We don't. But we're going to go on that journey and learn and have that kind of growth mindset together. Because I think if you don't do that, and then people sit there and they then start sort of obsessing over the things that they're worrying about that might not even be on the radar, and you kind of create this monster that was never there. It's like the monster under the bed.
Love that. And so when you think about the kind of uncertainty, where would you say are the most common causes of that uncertainty, or areas that you think that uncertainty sort of rears its head the most?
I think for a lot of people, it comes down to communication. Most of the individuals, when we hit a big change, our initial reaction is, what does this mean for me? What immediately is this going to mean to my job, my role, my security, all those things, my outside life? And each of those is going to be different for each person. So I think it's communication style of really quickly and clearly sort of setting those expectations and having those initial conversations. There's a lot of let's talk about an acquisition, for example. There's a lot that we need to do as the acquiring firm, but from their side, a lot of the staff don't appreciate that. They're just kind of like, no one's spoken to me yet, or I've got a meeting booked in like a week and a bit's time. What's between now and then? I think get in there, talk to them as quickly as you can, and kind of almost, even if you don't know all the answers, just have that conversation because it humanizes it.
That's really interesting because when I think about some of the firms that I've worked with, and I've got a particular one in mind where when I first started working with them, their leaders would err on the side of not communicating because partly through fear, partly through being worried about how their team might respond, the time that it would take to get the communications just right, and also in some cases assumption that they must know, or even that they're I've kind of had some conversation with managers, I'm sure that the rumor mill and whatever will get that message across. And I think the reality is that actually that doesn't happen. It's often said that in leadership you have to repeat the message 7 times, 11 times, whatever, to get everyone aligned. And I think that when there's a vacuum of information, people fill it often with the most negative, because they assume, well, if everything was great, they would be shouting about it. But so it must be really bad if I've not heard. Whereas, as you say, typically with these major change projects, whether it's acquisition or even changing offices or whatever, often there's just loads that needs to be done. And so communication can often get deprioritized. I've even seen it kind of deprioritized where it's like, well, so much is changing or so much is unknown. So, we'll wait until things are a bit more concrete until we start sharing. But I think, as you've shared, actually it's really important to get that communication in as early as possible, remove some of the uncertainty, be clear about where you don't have answers, but also help them understand that timeline. So I think that's really useful. I mean, based on your experience, like if we take on, let's focus on acquisition initially, what about aligning teams? We're talking there about communication being really important to remove uncertainty and reducing stress, but also communication is important as part of getting teams aligned around common ways of working and so on. What's been your experience? Are there specific areas that you've seen particular resistance, and how did you overcome that?
Yeah, I think again, similar kind of seek to understand before you change. I think so. We're really clear internally with all of our staff what our mission vision statement is. So, why do we exist? Why do we do what we do? We have a strategic flywheel that kind of says what we do, but also sort of the why in between. So we kind of do this because of this, and then that, and it goes round, and it's sort of circular, and it goes around and around and around. And then we have values that we put together with our team. Our team input what our core values are, and we talk about them, and we have them as documents, and they're quite clear. Or so we thought when we initially did it, and then we revisited it and we discussed it and we talked about the values, and then everyone kind of got their own take on it. And actually, I thought this meant that. And I think so. The first thing is just be clear in your current organization. Why do you exist? Why are you in business? And that doesn't have to be some big overarching humanitarian reason. It can be pure and whatever it is, and then communicate that, because I think it's really important as human beings to understand why we're doing something. It allows us to be a bit more adaptable and kind of bend. And then same, seek to understand their why, seek to understand, and ideally before you do a deal, what their values are, and align those kind of before you even get into the deal phase, and then revisit and touch point and kind of communicate and make sure when you say, well, we do this because it supports this value, or because that leads into our why, and we think this is a better way because of this, and then listen to what they had to say back as well. And a lot of time as an acquiring firm or a bigger firm, more established, you can think that your way is the right way, but actually some smaller practices have been more agile, been more adaptable. They might have faced challenges we've not faced yet. So for me, it's always about communication, open and clear comms, and it's going back to that why. It's not just because I said so, it's backing that up with a reason.
Nice, fantastic. And as you've sort of aligned ways of working beyond that, because obviously there's the alignment of, as you say, the vision, the values, and so on. When you've then gone the next level of detail into, how particular teams are working and processes and so on, firstly, is there a particular approach that you've used to try and get more alignment and get the best of both worlds? Are there particular processes or workflows where that's been more of a challenge than others, or even ones where you've not even attempted to do that? What's kind of been your approach when you start to get into the detail?
I think for me, it's the big kind of play off between standardization and autonomy. And do we want standardized processes where everyone's doing everything exactly the same way, or do you want autonomy so that you've got autonomous individuals and they can kind of pivot and change? And I think you want somewhere in the middle. So we had a management consultant we worked with in the past. She was ex-military, and she was a big fan of freedom within a framework. So we try and create a framework of sort of the boundaries, the sort of rules of engagement, the must-dos, the must-nots, and then we provide as much training as we can to have really well-equipped individuals. And then within that kind of framework, they're free. So we use Salesforce as our practice management software. There's a framework in terms of every job has to have engagement paperwork, and the engagement paperwork automatically creates the workflows, and the workflows have got kind of big stakes in the ground. So it doesn't matter what job you visit, those stakes are kind of in the sort of same place and mean the same things, but how you kind of get from one to the other might not always be the same. And that for me is the freedom part of, I don't need to tell you how to do this bit. I need to tell you sort of why you're doing it, what you're doing, and you're trained enough to work out the route, the best route, given the unique situation you might reach. And I think it's trying to find that balance between a standardized process, but with autonomous individuals kind of navigating. Otherwise, they kind of hit a roadblock and stand there and look around and say, I don't really know what to do. This wasn't in the handbook, which is way more complicated than it sounds, and it sounds quite complicated already.
Yeah, it's a funny one, isn't it? Because I think it reminds me of when I interviewed Dawn Marriott, who was sort of ex-AZ CEO, and I asked her a question around, where do you draw the line between allowing the autonomy versus having the consistent process? And her answer was, anything that makes sense for it to be consistent, we make it consistent. And I think it's, as you're saying, it's getting that balance is right. Like, I think sometimes people treat it as a decision of either one thing or the other. And of course, the answer is no. You need both. And I see a lot of people fear putting in structure, putting in process, etc., because they think, but then it'll lose autonomy, it'll lose creativity, it'll lose human touch. And actually, the reality is, as you say, you want freedom within the framework so that people can make decisions and use their brains and so on within the structures that are then provided. And in fact, I was talking to a new client of one of my businesses of AirManual recently, where she was talking about how she wants to systemize and then humanize. And my advice was, actually, you do both at the same time. Like, the human aspect of how you want your people to work with clients needs to be built into your systems. You don't make it systemized and then add that on top. Like, systemize how you want that interaction to happen. And so, and the same way as you say, have as part of your system, part of your framework, etc., where you want your team to make decisions and have that freedom. For you, when you're managing teams and supporting these teams to kind of change their ways of working, presumably you've encountered examples where people are struggling to let go of perhaps some of their old ways of working, or struggling to adopt perhaps more scalable systems and some of the ways of working that you're doing. How do you tend to approach that?
I think you've got to communicate really open. I personally have never met an individual that turned up and did a bad job just because they wanted to. They've not woken up that morning and gone, do you know what? I'm not going to listen to what Alex says. I'm just going to do a bad job and we'll see what happens. And I think the reality is, they either don't understand what you're asking them to do. Maybe there's a fear element of, I can't do that, so if I do it the way I've done it before, it'll probably be all right. They might actually just not agree with you and not feel that they can tell you that they think they know better or their way works better. And the reality is, it might. Like, sometimes it does. Or there's just a comms issue and they've just not really understood what you're asking them to do, and they think they're doing the right thing and they're not. And I think all of those things come down to sitting down with that individual and kind of going, you're not doing this how I thought we had agreed, re-explaining. And you said sometimes you have to say things 7, 8 times to get it across, but then also making it really clear it's okay to fail. I think positive failure is a big part of our culture at Ad Valorem. It's something, Nigel, my MD, is kind of distilled in me since I was 17 years old. It's perfectly okay to try something and not succeed, as long as you learn from it and you kind of take that forward. And I think that's a really big part of change. If you don't create a growth mindset, if you don't create a positive failure environment, and people are so frightened of not getting it right, then the prospect of change is demonstrably larger, because suddenly they have to get it perfect first time and it's different.
Really nice. And I can see in many roles, industries, etc., where you've got particularly the people who most want to get it right or see the importance in getting it right. Like, in your own industry, in accountancy, there'll be loads of people who say, but it's so important that I get this right. And as when you're saying, you need to make it okay to fail. You need to make it okay to make mistakes. Like that will pull at the very heart of everything that they hold dear in relation to their role, and even their own self-esteem around how they perform in that role, right? And so I can completely see how when you're approaching that, the communication around it has to be really good and really clear. But as you say, you have to create openness, and I suppose also creating the openness around it's okay and understandable for you as the bringer of change to make mistakes as well.
Yeah.
In the same way as you say, it's possible that the new way you're proposing isn't better than what they're doing. And so you kind of need to have that door open that they can share that with you so that either you can learn and improve what you're doing, or you can have that discussion and they can realize, no, actually, there's a misunderstanding. This new way is better. And so I can see that.
I've had
What,
a mentor in the past that had put it a really good way. Is, I might not know the best way to do it, but you need to be in the room if you're going to tell me a better way, right? And I think engagement. You need to invite that engagement and create an environment where people want to be there. But you also need to get them to understand. If you think you know a better way of doing it, you need to be in the conversation to influence that. Otherwise, if you're stood outside, kind of going,
yeah.
it's not going to change. And so inviting that kind of community, bringing it together is, I don't know the best way. I've got a way. And if you can prove there's a better way, then I'm all ears, and I'll happily pivot, and I'll happily change my perspective.
Nice. Yeah, really good. And when we're getting into sort of perhaps more innovative areas and bigger changes, obviously that friction can get harder. I mean, you've played a big role in professionalizing existing teams, preparing teams for kind of more innovation, including leveraging AI. Like, what do you think is key to making that less intimidating?
Low stakes environments, again, where it's okay to not necessarily have all the answers. No, and I think AI is one of those big ones. We've been talking about it as an industry for 3.5, 4 years. And the reality is that most people are talking about it still aren't giving practical use case. This is how I use it, because a lot of people are scared to put it in, because we are in a high stake environment. We're in a high stake, either client communications or confidential information environment. And I did a talk at the ETL conference to all the managing partners of the ETL UK group. And I did it on an AI assistant, and I showed them how to customize an AI assistant. And I thought I could try and show you how to build a PA or a strategic tax advisor. But I was like, one of the things that works really well in my household is we have a meal planner. And so she knows that my children, their sort of ages, roughly who eats what and who doesn't, what kitchen appliances we've got. And I go to her and say, I want 5 meals for this week, 3 lunches, 2 veggie, and then she'll just give me like a short list of menu ideas. And then once she's done that, we go, I don't want that one, I want another one, take that off. And then we've got all that, and then we say, turn it into a shopping list. And then so what she does is she then takes my meal plan, turns it into a shopping list, optimized for the supermarkets I tend to shop in, and then we use that just a meal planner. It just took a job that we all hated doing and basically just ended up having the same things on rote, and used AI in a space that actually felt really safe, and you played with it and you got used to prompting and you got used to challenging it and you got used to getting it to go that next step of like, okay, give me a first thing, turn that into my shopping list, or I don't have that, can you give me an alternative ingredient? And it was a really low stake space where a lot of people that wouldn't traditionally interact with AI, not techies, thought, oh, that's really good. That will save me an hour on a Sunday. And I think it just made it a really low stakes place to kind of just play around with it and see how it works.
Nice. Yeah, no, I think I've experienced that too, that feeling of sometimes playing around with AI is easier when you're applying it to something that's more discrete or trivial or whatever, and therefore it's got a tighter scope rather than the complexity of work tasks, so that you can learn and then apply it in that work environment. Are there particular use cases of AI that you've found in your firm have led to particular sort of jumps forward in productivity or service delivery or whatever? Because as you say, often people struggle with the visualizing, like, what does it actually look like to leverage this in day-to-day work?
Yeah, I think there's some really quick wins. So AI note takers, if you guys, people have not played around with them, get one. Make sure the people you're in the meeting with know that you're using an AI note taker and all the other kind of housekeeping stuff. But I hate, if you're anything like me, love talking, hate taking minutes, hate kind of doing follow-up. And it just completely kind of revolutionized that for me. It was kind of like going back to the old days when you had someone sat in the room typing everything you wanted and summarizing at the end. And you basically brought that back in, but as AI. Same again with emails. Actually, one of the people that took to AI email writing the quickest was an ex-partner I knew that used to dictate all his emails to his PA. So for him, it just meant you're dictating your emails to an AI assistant instead of to your PA. So he was kind of, by almost being behind where other people were, was ahead on the AI leap of, well, I'm happy for someone else to write this for me. And I think it kind of changed that mindset of, do you need to write every word, or do you just need to steer it and then review it at the end? And then once you can get past that, for me, research. So getting it to go away, again, this takes a bit more, giving it a bit more of a framework to work within. So I've got one that does tax and accountancy research for me, and it's only allowed to go to sort of 5 websites, and it can't go outside of that. It has to return links. So it's been built in a certain way that's usable for me. But it just means it's like a supercharged Google, and it can interpret, and the real superpower is the next level. It's not just finding me the answer, but it's then turning that into an email. And then if I think that'll be helpful for 10 other clients, turning that into a blog post and optimizing that for us, and all the other kind of fun stuff you can do afterwards. So it's not necessarily about the first step, which is obtain information. It's the superpower of what you can do with that information afterwards, and how many mediums you can kind of roll it out on.
Nice. And I really like, in all of those examples, you can see immediate jumps in efficiency, or, removing caps on your ability to create, like in the example of taking some research that then turns into an email for one client, that then turns into a bulk email for all clients, that then turns into a blog article that goes out on the website, etc. And how, without AI, all of that would be seen as such a huge distraction and procrastination from what you're meant to be doing, which is like doing a piece of research for one client and responding. And so I think that's really powerful. But also what strikes me there is how important it is that that's part of a wider process, right? Like, for example, even the note taker, that note taking benefit is useless unless those notes then go somewhere and something is done with them. And, you kind of need to decide, okay, where are these notes going so that someone can use them? Equally, for something like the bulk email to your clients, or sending a blog post, you need that easy way in which, okay, how does content then become something that can be an email that's sent around to everyone, or become a blog post, and who then runs with that? Is that you? And do you know how to then add it to the platform in the right way so that you don't, accidentally delete everything else and all those sorts of things?
Don't leave all your M hyphens in so everyone knows it was ChatGPT. And I think that's the other big bit, is you need to bookend it with a human. A human needs to tell it what to do. And in my mind, a human still needs to check at the other end and make sure it's got a soul still. It's still got the feel of your firm or your company, and you're not just spitting out kind of generic stuff. So I think for me, the big part, bookending it with process and people, to make sure that A, you use it properly, but B, it represents you. Because if we get into the age where everyone's just creating content with AI, we will lose our soul, we'll lose our identity. And then how do you distinguish yourself? Is it just who shouts the loudest or puts the most out?
Yeah, agreed. And I think that I really like that point around making sure that you're, bookending it with the human process. Because, I often talk about it as, use it as a junior employee, use it to do things where what good looks like as an output. Because I think the risk is when I see people using it to achieve things that they're not able to assess whether it's done a good job. So, for example, research is always a dangerous area because it can hallucinate like all sorts of things. Like there was a case, I'm part of a Reddit group where there was a guy who posted on there about he's a lawyer, and in a case that he was fighting one side of, the lawyer on the other side had submitted this sort of submission to the judge, and they didn't have very long to do so, and so it was rushed. But the lawyer that was posting this Reddit thing was saying, I could see it was AI, and I could see initially I was terrified because it quoted all these precedents and cases that I thought, oh, this completely destroys my case. And they started looking into each of them, and they either didn't exist or the conclusion was inaccurate or whatever. And of course, as a lawyer, you basically had to get a spreadsheet and start listing them out and explain. And so, that person on the other side of that case probably, could be removed from their job and all that kind of stuff, and get in a lot of trouble. And I see quite a few of these examples. Like a funny example was that my mum was looking at, she got tickets for Wembley to go and see a performance. And she was like, oh, I want to, we've got a few tickets. I want to work out which one would be the best, where's there going to be the best places to sit and so on. And so she asked ChatGPT and took that as read. And of course, ChatGPT doesn't know where the best place to sit and so on. Whereas there are tools on Wembley's website to go and see exactly what the stage would look like from that view. And so I was able to demonstrate, like, it doesn't know. Like, it says that there's bars in the way. There isn't, like you can see in this picture, but there are of the other seat. And I think that's where I see they are working best, is when you know what you want as an output, you know what good looks like as an output, it helps you get there faster. Like, you know what good notes from a meeting that you've had would look like, you know what a appropriate summary would be, and therefore you're able to use it in that way. How have you helped your teams, and particularly, as part of acquisitions and so on, where you've got people that you haven't worked with before and haven't hired and so on, how are you helping them get that and use automation tools and AI in a way that doesn't then cause you problems in terms of quality delivery for clients and so on?
I think that's the much harder part, right? And again, it comes back to the framework. You've got to set out what that framework looks like. We've got a policy that is very clear that it's still your responsibility what you send out. In the same way it would be for a junior, when I was coming up and training, if a junior drafted an email for me, which happened quite regularly, when I took that email and sent it to a client, I'm now responsible for everything in it. So if I've not checked it or validated it, or when the client comes back to me and goes, "What are you talking about?" I can't go, "Oh, Mark wrote it. It was mine. I sent it. It's now my responsibility." And the same with AI stuff. I'm a big fan of customizing. So I said, did it with the meal planner, but I do it for everything. So even my personal assistant, I've given her a persona and how she writes. She knows she works for me. She knows she works for Ad Valorem. I give them names because it helps me humanize and remember which one does what. But I build it to do a job and tell it sort of how I want it to do that job, where I want it to get the information to do that job. Specifically told her not to use M hyphens because I hate them. Apparently they are real grammar, although none of us saw them.
The annoying thing is I love M dash and I've been using them long before ChatGPT.
You're the only person I've ever met that used them before ChatGPT.
Have a look in all my LinkedIn posts, etc. pre-November 2022. You'll find M dashes all the way in.
Amazing. But stuff like that where I'm just like, I don't use that. That's not my language style. I uploaded it. I've given her examples of my best emails. Of like, this is what I want you to deliver. And for me, it then works for me. It has a bit more of that soul, and I still mess around with it and change it. But I think one of the great things for it is you don't get writer's block, that empty page. Again, that failure point. When you're trying to drive starting for a client, it can't be wrong. So you have to start from a position that you're going to end with a final result you like. Whereas when you're a GPT, you go dropping an email along the lines of bang, don't really think about what you're writing. It chucks over and you go, I hate that bit. Oh, that's good. And then you're in a different skill set, I think, at that point. And for me, that really works. So framework, rules, customize it. I don't use the out-of-the-box versions of any of the AI stuff. All of them have versions where you can then customize how it responds to you, and have different ones for different things. Don't just have one custom one. So I've got a different, like you wouldn't use one person to do all your different tasks, train them. They're really good at role playing. So give them.
Nice. Really, really good. Moving away from kind of the AI side and moving back to people and the journey that they go on with us as part of changes. There's often, particularly with acquisitions, there's often a tension between the kind of us and them, and seeing yourself as one side of the divide or another. How have you gone about removing that divide?
I think you need to do it slowly. I think there's a lot of people out there be like, oh, day one, we're all the same people. And ultimately what that means is you're ignoring their identity and just expecting them to take yours on and be that from day one, because there's no way you can merge two cultures that quickly. So from that standpoint, I think it doesn't really track. It just kind of goes, we don't really care where you came from or who you are. This is who you are now. Live it, breathe it. And I think it takes time. You need to, as I said, you need to understand their culture. Hopefully you've already done some due diligence on who they are, why they do what they do, how they interact with whatever it looks like. But take time to understand what that actually means in reality, because a lot of people, like I said, when they write something down, they think it does what it says on the tin. And then when you start to dig into it, they have a different perception than maybe their right-hand man or their partner, or, sometimes husband and wife teams are, saying the same thing, but in completely different spaces as to what that might mean. So explore it, understand it, and then over time bring them together. And it's challenging because there is a cut-off point where you go, sometimes we still refer to it as the old name. You'll be like, oh, that office. And when do you stop doing that? And does that detract from who they are? But you also want them to be part of the Ad Valorem family. So I think like with any relationship, it is a relationship. It is a getting to know each other. It is a building trust. So be consistent. Do what you say you're going to do, which can be really challenging in some of these points because you feel like you need to give an answer, but you've got a lot of other things going on. But you are trying to build trust and reliability within what is quite a stressful time for some of these people. They didn't choose this change. Most of them don't get a decision in the acquisition. They're kind of almost told, sometimes even told on the day, hey, by the way, we've sold to these people. They'll be here later on to talk to you, which as the acquiring party is quite difficult because you don't get to manage that bit. You don't get to really come until after that. You're not quite sure what they've been told. And I think it's just a big seek to understand, be patient, be consistent, and kind of set expectations and hold yourself to them, but also hold other people to them. And you'll build that kind of reliability, trust. Oh, they do what they say they're going to do. And they might not always like it. Sometimes you're going to have to do quite unpopular things, but as long as you've set that out and delivered on it, I think that builds at least respect.
Nice. And have you been involved in perhaps acquisitions, mergers, etc., where perhaps the culture or operational standards have been very different? And what's been your experience, or what advice would you give for how to, really close quite big chasms in ways of working?
I think try and uncover them early. So, Nikki and Nigel talk relatively open about this, but the first acquisition we did not go particularly well because one of the first acquisitions we'd ever done. So we focused on the partner. Was there alignment to some degree between, did Nigel and Nikki think they could work with him for at least the exit period? Was it going to be a massive culture shock to the clients? Then we focused on the clients. Who are they? Where are they? What do they do? Fee alignment. And we didn't focus enough on the staff. We almost took it for a given. They're accountants, we're accountants. That's going to be similar. That we're going to have very similar ways of doing stuff or values or goals. And then when we got into it, we kind of uncovered all the human elements, all the emotions, all the different ways and promises that have been made up to that point that then they kind of expect you to deliver on because you're now the new boss. They don't really care that Mr. X said it and now Mr. Y is in that seat. They were kind of, I was promised this at this point. What's going on? And I think for us, it just increased the due diligence we did on the people exponentially. We do a lot internally anyway in terms of sort of profiling. So we do personality profiling on all of our staff when they join. It's not a label, it's not a sticker to say this is who you are, but it's to seek to understand maybe how they will process or how they will deal with situations and information and also how we will and how we like to receive stuff. And then if you've got two people that are very opposing individuals, if you understand that, you can approach it with knowledge that, okay, we're going to process things differently, but that's not because I hate you or I think you're an idiot. It's because we just understand information differently. And we do that as well on acquisitions to kind of go, who are they? We do two primarily. We do Myers-Briggs sort of personality profiling, and we do Belbin, which is a team role. So who are you within a team? And I think that's really integral for us to understand what that team looks like, what they're amazing at, where they potentially have what calls allowable weaknesses. So accountants typically are big completed finishers and specialists. So we really like to get all of the information that we could possibly need and iron every single crease out and make sure there's no gaps. What that means is we're normally pretty slow or we hit inertia and you go, I don't know the answer, so I don't want to make a wrong choice. And understand if your team's really heavily in that way, then if you introduce a new process that's not necessarily fully ironed out or got a definitive answer, they're going to feel really uncomfortable with that. And that's going to take more to kind of lead through. Yeah, more due diligence before you even get into the conversation would be my advice. But outside of that is seek to understand who they are and why they do what they do and how they like to be spoken to. And there are some amazing tools out there help with that. I know other people use different ones and like the colored based one and various ones out there, but they're not answers, but they're kind of indicators of, right, how should I communicate with this person or what's going to work best with them.
Nice. And when you're communicating changes in process, different ways of working, etc., what have you found work really well to get people clear on what that looks like? Because you mentioned that, particularly with certain roles, etc., like accountancy, where they're like, yeah, they want to see that level of detail and feel that confidence. Is there anything that you found has worked particularly well to try and get them there?
I think practical examples. So I did a training session today with our latest acquisition on Salesforce and how it works and kind of like, it's so big, it's so vast, it does everything in our practice. And if I was to try and sit down and take you from A to Z in the Ad Valorem set, your mind would blow. I'd get lost. We wouldn't get there. So it's like, what do you need to know now? We're putting that in system implementation at the end of the month. What do you guys need to know? Well, you need to understand fundamentally the structure, what it looks, what, how to do your timesheet, and how to kind of navigate clients and complete work. And if you can do that for week one, you can do your timesheet, you can do your job stages, and you can find all the relevant information about your client. We can cover off reporting and all the other fun stuff once you've kind of got to the basics. So I think take them through practically, show them how to do it. I think for me, I really like to kind of touch something, feel it, try it, work out what I don't know, kind of come back to it. And I think that is, for me, the best way in terms of it allows people to try it and then go, I don't get that, or I need you to explain this. Whereas if you're trying to do it in a classroom setting from a completely hypothetical situation, you end up just going off on tangents. So pick a client they know, pick a piece of work they know, and run them through how you do it in your new system, and ask questions like, how would you have done that in your old system? Or was there anything you'd have done in your old system that we've not covered? Or, is there anything you don't understand? And I think if you can take them through a practical thing that they can tie back to something they know really well, they feel more informed to kind of almost ask questions and challenge. And I had one individual on the train this morning, which was phenomenal at challenging, asking questions. This is how it used to work. How's that going to work? And it's great for everyone else in the room as well. So also group sessions, because you'll get different perspective and different viewpoint, and they'll bolster each other. Whereas sometimes if you get like one-on-one or very small groups, you get people who don't want to ask questions because they don't want to either look silly or take up time. And I think that when you get to that medium size, I'd say probably 6 to 8 people, you kind of get that team dynamic, and you'll get someone that will naturally ask questions, and you'll start to build.
I really like that. And I think it's interesting as well, you talk about, seeing that person who's giving lots of challenge, seeing that as a good thing, because I think it's very easy in a lot of scenarios to feel like the person who's asking all the questions or answering these questions or that won't work, starting to feel quite antagonistic towards them. Whereas I think your experience has been in line with mine, which is actually they're a gift. Like the ones to watch out for are the ones that are silent and not not excitedly nodding and like agreeing and adding examples of how this is going to help, but equally aren't coming up with reasons why it'll fail, because they're the ones that go talk about outside of the room, yeah, it's not really going to work, and I don't think it's going to help and whatever, yet aren't saying it to you, so you can't either address it with them or change your approach. And I've definitely experienced that, where actually some of the best people in that room are the ones that challenge you hardest, because they're the ones that then either help you change it, or often more likely, they then change their view based on an improved understanding, and then they're able to go out and convince others. And so I think really embracing that, I think, is important, because again, it kind of loops back to something we talked about early on, which is so many leaders fear that communication, fear going out and sharing that, because they fear the pushback, and they'd prefer that everyone's just quiet, and they prefer to just send an email or whatever, when actually you want that friction, you want that, I often talk about like business growth and continuous improvement and development. It's a spiral. Like you have to go back, and you'll get some feedback, and you go back and improve what you're doing, and then you go out and out, but each time you'd improve it at a higher level, and so you're continue to elevate. Whereas if you're just hitting messages out there and not getting it bounced back and not going on that journey, then you don't improve. I think I'd be really interested as well as to whether there's any other like common myths or assumptions that you think people make around mergers, acquisitions, or just business growth that you think are completely wrong.
Ooh, I think you kind of touched on it a little bit already, but I need to know all the answers. They expect me to know all the answers. I think the reality is, anyone that's been in that position, you don't lead with all the answers all the time. And seeking those answers together, going on that journey, involving your team is so powerful, because then they feel like they did it as well. Whereas you turn up and kind of go, stand over there, do this, you kind of almost, you're going to win or lose on your own. Whereas if you bring that team on that journey, everything's easier, and everything just feels, it magnifies the bad sides, it magnifies the positives. But I think that's what kind of doing that together is. So it's okay not to know all the answers, and it's okay to seek those and defer to other people in the room. Nigel's quoted for saying, he's not the smartest person in the room. He surrounds himself with people that know certain things better than he does. So yeah, big thing for me is, again, don't have to be a jack of all trades. We see it a lot in the accountancy world. You'll have a HR partner that's an accountant, an IT partner that's the accountant that's best with his computer. And there will be accountants, and there will just be partners of the firm that have been given like a hat to wear, kind of like our politicians. But get a specialist, right? Why is the person in charge of HR not a HR specialist that understands that? Why is the IT person not an IT specialist? They don't need to know accounts. They need to know IT. I've got accountants and no accounts. So get people in with specialist roles that have the qualification to do that job the best they can, and then listen to them. And that doesn't mean you always do what they say, but take that information in, understand it, digest it, challenge it, communicate that back. Because success is not an individual sport, it is a team sport. And the bigger you get, and you said to keep going up, there's a book by Simon Sinek called The Infinite Game. It's not a defined game. It's not going to end. No one goes, well done, you won business. It is iterative. It does change. It evolves. And so if you're not going on that spiral and continuously challenging yourself and readjusting, you're going to hit a false end, which like the game's not over, but you're kind of done playing it. And you're going to hit that point where no one else wants to play with you anymore. And you kind of just stood with the ball on your own. So they're my things that, they're quite big. I've probably haven't answered the question, but just kind of go on that journey and embrace that you're going to learn a lot of things along the way.
Fantastic answer. I actually really love that. Great. Some quick fire questions for you now. So if you can, one sentence only. What's the best question you've ever been asked?
What's the biggest mistake I've ever made?
Ooh. What's the biggest mistake you've ever made?
Probably thinking I know all the answers. As a younger man, arrogance was definitely a danger.
Cool. Fantastic. What one thing causes the most stress for your team?
The unknown, uncertainty. As I said earlier on, people then spiral and go down routes you didn't even comprehend, to think, to answer, and they end up in a space that you just can't understand.
Nice. What one thing causes the most stress for you?
Not being able to see where I'm going, not having information to make decisions from.
What do you enjoy most in the business right now?
Change and innovation. We're in a point of amazing amount of change in our industry, and kind of getting to be at the forefront of that is phenomenal.
What do you enjoy most in your personal life?
My children, and getting to spend time. They're quite young, so they're all learning things and exploring, and they've got that amazing sort of human curiosity about them, and they're unapologetic with it.
What book or podcast has been most pivotal for you in changing your life or work for the better?
I'd say Never Split the Difference. Phenomenal book written by an ex-FBI negotiator on basically how compromise is the worst thing, and you end up wearing one black shoe and one brown shoe. You need to understand the root cause of the problem, and it's not the other person. The negotiation is the issue, and you're with that other person working as a team to solve that issue.
What's the one thing you want business leaders to take from this episode?
It's okay to not know all the answers. It's the journey of finding those answers with your team that's the real one.
Love it. Fantastic work. Well done, and thank you, Alex. Your input's been really, really good on this. I'll make sure that we include links in the show notes to Ad Valorem and to ETL Global, and also to Alex's profile on LinkedIn. Any other resources or links that we should include?
I think that probably covers it. Maybe some of the Belbin stuff. I think that's people have found that really helpful. There's loads of tools out there to use for it, but seek to understand, and that's a really good tool of getting your team involved.
Fantastic. Brilliant. Absolutely love that. Well, thank you so much, Alex, for joining me, and to everyone else, thanks so much for listening. If you found this episode useful, please do go to Apple Podcasts and leave a 5-star review with a comment. Even if it's just one word, it makes a huge difference. I read them all and really appreciate it, and it makes a big difference to the podcast. But also, if there's anyone else that you think would find this episode really useful, perhaps they're currently embarking on some big business change or about to explore mergers and acquisitions and so on, please do share it with them, perhaps via social media or whatever, and tag me in and tag Alex in. We'd really like to know that you're getting value out of it. But otherwise, until next time, have fun.